Good afternoon. My name is JoAnne Alvarez, and for those who don't know me, I'm the Director of Student Success and Retention, along with Campus Diversity Lead. On behalf of the Diversity Council, I want to thank you all for joining us today and send a big thank you to our brave panelists, whom I will introduce shortly. In working together with the Diversity Council, we decided we wanted to create a platform to help begin dialogue on topics that can sometimes lead to uncomfortable but necessary conversations. As an institution of higher learning, we know the importance of having discussions where people can safely touch on social issues and current events. Today's discussion on white men sharing their perspective on Black Lives Matter can be difficult, and we ask that you listen to learn and to listen without judgment. While we will ask the audience to mute themselves, we would like for you to submit your questions, be respectful, and allow for grace. This is an opportunity to create dialogue, ask questions, and learn. As part of the Diversity Council, we hope to have future discussions in a safe, open learning environment. So we ask that if you have any ideas on future topics, you share that with me or other members of the council. So at this point, I would like to introduce our panelists, and I will ask that each of you wave so that people know who you are. We begin with Mr. Todd Nichols. He's the Director of Disability Services for the Northeast Service Area. Todd has worked at Ivy Tech for 14 years and also serves as co-chair of the Behavior Intervention Team. And then we have Mr. Timothy J. Ross, Director of the Express Enrollment Center and former director of TRIO Student Support Services Program. Tim has been with the college for 15 years, and prior to working at Ivy Tech, Tim spent 24 years in the U.S. Army. Nicholas Spangle is the Director of Enrollment Services and Student Success. Nick has worked at the Ivy Tech Warsaw location for the past 6 years. He's also the club advisor for the ETC Club, or etc. period, Equality Transforms Communities period, which is an LGBTQ+ support group. We also have guest panelist Dr. Patrick Ashton. Pat is an associate professor emeritus of sociology and peace and conflict studies at the former IPFW and former adjunct lecturer in sociology and peace studies at Manchester University. Diversity and racial justice has been at the heart of Dr. Ashton's teachings and service work for over 40 years. He has conducted a dozen workshops on diversity, given 75 presentations on diversity and student success, and mentored dozens of minority students. To lead today's discussion, we've invited Dr. Alan Decker, Vice Chancellor of the Warsaw campus, to serve as our moderator. Dr. Alan Decker has been with us for the last 4 years, and prior to that, Alan directed education and training programs for the Lake City Bank and was also a faculty administrator at Grace College, where he served as sponsor to the Black Student Association. And with that, I'll turn it over to Alan. Thank you all.
Thank you, JoAnne, and thank you to the rest of our gentlemen on our panel today who all agreed to participate after being invited by the council. So we didn't go on a campaign to be on this panel. We were asked and agreed, and so I think in that spirit, we're looking forward to having a good conversation today. A few comments just to set the context and maybe some expectations as well. You know, we recognize that the white male's perspective is not always sought or valued in difficult conversations about race. So we really hope that this is an opportunity to give voice to some of those perspectives, and that at the same time it's a relatively safe space in which to do that. Not that we don't invite disagreement or invite other perspectives, but we all want to explore with you some of these themes. And our intent is not to teach or preach or explain, but just explore various perspectives and to continue our own learning as well. And although we're all white males, obviously each of us bring our own perspectives and our own experiences, and we want to continue learning as well. And so our perspectives are evolving. I imagine I will feel differently about some of the things we're going to talk about today next year than I feel today. And I hope that's the case. I hope that we're all on a path toward greater self-discovery and greater self-awareness and greater awareness of issues that affect us today. So We'll spend about 45 minutes in a structured conversation around several questions. And you are welcome to send your questions or comments in via the chat, and you can do that by either sending them privately to me or to JoAnne, either one of us. Obviously, if you send it to JoAnne, she'll need to find a way to break in at an appropriate time with that question, but either one of us will field your questions. So we'll inject some of those questions and comments as they're relevant in the discussion, but then we'll also address whatever's left over or whatever else comes in during about a 15 to 20 minute Q&A period after our discussion here. So with that, let's start by talking about just race in general, and then we're going to pivot a little bit toward the Black Lives Matter movement, because that really is the focus of our panel today. But several of us here at Ivy Tech are involved in a book study around the book White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism. And author Robin DiAngelo asserts this. She says, whiteness rests upon a foundational premise, the definition of whites as the norm or standard for human, and people of color as a deviation from that norm. Whiteness is not acknowledged by white people, and the white reference point is assumed to be universal and is imposed on everyone. White people find it very difficult to think about whiteness as a specific state of being that could have an impact on one's life and perceptions. I think what DiAngelo is saying is that white people carry a privilege in that they don't have to think about race every day. And because they don't often have to think about race every day, now that's a generalization, that's not true for everyone, but in general, because that is generally true, conversations about race can feel clumsy and can feel awkward, and I think often do lead to a sense of defensiveness. So to our panel, because talking about race can be difficult, why, and I want to hear from each of you briefly, why were you willing to participate today? And what also gives you pause about participating in a panel like this one? Tim, you want to lead us off?
I'm sorry, you said me, Alan?
Sure.
Okay. It's funny how life brings us to different intersections and different times. I'm actually taking 2 master's classes in advising this semester, and both of them are somewhat involved with multicultural advising. And so one of the things that I just studied last week was the idea of white privilege and how it works, and how we as individuals, as white people, can be oblivious to it. And so that, in combination with the idea of the stuff that has happened in the different cities with Black people being killed by police officers under questionable circumstances, I just feel like there's a need for a change. And I feel like this is me trying to open the door to learning more about how I can be a part of that change.
Great. And what gives you pause or hesitation about being in a conversation like this that's being recorded?
Because it is a difficult, and because I am a person who cares about other people. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to be misconstrued as somebody who is a racist because I said something out of turn, and sometimes I just don't know the right words to use.
Yeah, well said. Nick, how about you?
Well, when I was first asked to be on the panel, my initial reaction was, great, because we haven't heard from the male white perspective on things in a while. But I mean, from my vantage point, the white male perspective pervades our entire culture and has built our culture, and is what we, what we're living as a result of that. Really, the reason that I said yes was really thinking about my own intersectionality when it comes to, race and other attributes that I hold. I'm a white person, but I'm also a queer person, and fighting for, equality and equity, for myself as well. So I felt my perspective might be a little different than those others on the panel. And so that's why I felt comfortable kind of saying yes. And I think the thing that gave me pause was that, you know, race is a highly charged thing to talk about, especially right now where we're in a very divisive election. You know, Breonna Taylor's grand jury verdict just came down. And sometimes it does feel like some people are jonesing for a fight. And that's obviously, you don't want to put yourself into that kind of situation. But I also think that, you know, you never want to, just like Tim said, you don't want to be misconstrued. You don't want to say something hurtful, no matter how unintentional it might be. And when you're surrounded by all of your colleagues, be a little stressful, right? I have these conversations all the time with my family, but you know, that's different when you get outside of that comfort zone. So those things kind of gave me a little pause, but I'm ready to have the conversation.
All right, good for you. Todd?
You know, about a year ago, if I'd have been asked, I probably would have said no, because, you know, with my biography, where I lived, who I worked with, how I've conducted my life, I'm kind of a white progressive woke person. You know, I felt real secure in the fact that race is a social construct, not a biological fact. And I was always able to retreat to that comfortable spot. I'd say within the last 8 months, you know, I've come to realize that my position, my role and status and my silence is complicit with long-term, you know, systemic racism. And I have to face up to my own racism. So I'm trying to do three things. One, I'm trying to recognize and reduce the harm that I may have done and be doing, even if it's silence. And the other is I want to be able to talk and speak with other people that look like me, white people, because the vast majority of people that I interact with do not think about things, races, other people's problems. And last, I want to become a better ally. And I think that if you're going to say that we need to talk about this and participate and do something, then it's my responsibility to step up and say yes. The pause. People that look like me are supposed to be listening right now. And,
That's the elephant in the room, isn't it?
Yeah, and so there's an author named Damon Young. He's an author of color, wrote in the New York Times on July 10th that, let's not talk about race unless you're going to pay me. And it talks about the constant strain and stress of being a Black author and walking down the road and having some guy like me come up to you and want to have a serious conversation about race. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I'm in that uncomfortable part of me, place where, you know, JoAnne, Dr. Alvarez and I've talked before, we have to be comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. And so we're going to make mistakes, and this is seen as a mistake. That's fine. But if you look at anybody that has succeeded, whether it be women in voting rights, Jackie Robinson, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, I mean, we can make a long list of names. They earn all the credit, and they were spectacular in what they did. But at the end of the day, white men allowed women to vote. Jackie Robinson did not break through the color barrier. White men allowed him to play baseball. They didn't allow Satchel Paige to play baseball in the major leagues. So that's why I'm here.
Great, thanks, Todd. And Pat, your thoughts?
Well, I have several. I'd like to pick up on something Todd said to begin with, to provide some context. As a sociologist, back in 1944, as World War II was coming to an end, the U.S., the Carnegie Corporation actually decided that we better deal with this race problem, because you're going to have all these African-American soldiers who fought in World War II and experienced something different, and they're going to be coming home, and our economy is going to be changing, and so on. And so we need to really seriously examine the race issue. And so in order to be objective, they funded a Swedish Nobel laureate economist by the name of Gunnar Myrdal to come and do an investigation, objective investigation of race in the United States. And they produced a final report called An American Dilemma. Some of you may know it. If you want to know more about it, you can send in questions on the chat. But anyway, it was a massive work. Murdahl knew as an outsider, though, he needed an insight. So he went to Dr. Ralph Bunche, the first African-American to get a PhD in political science. Later went on to help found the United Nations, and was the first African-American to win the Nobel Peace Prize, one of only 3 to date. I'll let you ponder who the other 2 are. But anyway, with Ralph Bunche's insight, they produced this massive 2-volume report, An American Dilemma. And what was their major conclusion? That the Negro problem, as they called it at the time, is a white man's problem. That was the conclusion of this report in 1944. Now, it sold over 100,000 copies in the first printing, was widely read, and then, like so much else, promptly forgotten, apparently. Like the Kerner Commission report in 1968, which talked about the evolution of America into 2 separate societies, black and white, separate but unequal, which we've also forgotten about. And so, in some sense, Black Lives Matter is not something new, it's very old. But I think in terms of this panel today, that insight by the Murdahl's work in the Carnegie Corporation definitely reflects what Todd is talking about, that the problem that African Americans face is a problem of white men to a large extent, because it's white men who hold the power. Mm-hmm. So how I come to this, just somewhat briefly, I realize I'm the oldest person here. I've been doing this longer than everybody. I don't suggest that gives me any more wisdom necessarily than anyone else, but it means I've been doing it for a little bit longer. Just briefly, I was lucky enough to grow up in a family, even though it was an all-white, very racist, working-class neighborhood in Detroit. It was very committed to not allowing people of color to live there. My parents did not accept that. And at 12 years old, I was working in the inner city of Detroit, and went on to do, when I got out of high school, I helped co-found what is today one of the largest private racial justice equity organizations in the country. I'm not responsible for where they went, but I was part of the founding. And as if I had to sum up my professional work as a sociologist, I would say that as a white person, I have tried to use my position in power to mentor and advocate for students of color, and to educate white people in particular, white students in particular, about unearned privilege. And I've been doing that for 40 years. And so I don't pretend I've got it. In fact, one of the terrible things about retiring just after this spring was that I'm kind of going crazy here thinking, oh my gosh, look at the headlines. There's so much I'd like to share with students. So I missed that part. I'm very thankful to be invited here today to kind of Jones on my teaching aspect. And so I hope what I have to say doesn't come off too much as a classroom sort of thing, but I do want to bring those insights.
We're so grateful for your experience. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, Pat, and then we're going to pivot to Black Lives Matter. What do you think is sort of the prevailing misconception held by white people in general about what we call white privilege? Okay,
very quickly, can I just say 3 things? Number 1, I don't see color. Incredible myth. Of course we see color. Get real. And imagine a world without color. I mean, we have our flat screen color TVs and everything else. Imagine how a kaleidoscope would work if you couldn't see color. It wouldn't be very interesting at all, would it? And of course, when it comes to race, we do see color. Dr. Jane Elliott, who came up with the famous brown eyes, blue eyes experiment. And again, I won't go into that. If you have questions, send them to the chat. We can talk about it later.
Fantastic documentary. Yep.
Yes, amazing thing. She was a 3rd grade school teacher in Kansas, I think. and Martin Luther King was assassinated, and she knew that the next day she had to go into the classroom and say something to those kids. And so she came up with an experiment to try and get them to experience systematic privilege and oppression. Well, she went on to be a diversity educator. And one of the things she's done recently is she would ask white audiences, I would like anybody in this audience, any white person in this audience who would right now change places with any black person in America to stand up. And of course, no one ever stands up, or perhaps one or two isolated individuals. And she says, there you go. You know it. You know that it matters. You know that black people don't have the same deal that white people have because you're unwilling to switch places. So don't tell me you don't see color. You do, and you're glad you have it. Now, what are we going to do with that? So we do see color. Secondly, racism will go away if we just stop talking about it. You got people who say, why are we having this forum? Why? Oh my God, not another thing about racism. You know, if people would just drop it, we could move on. Yes, there are issues, but come on, let's not belabor this. But of course, it won't go away if we keep talking about it. I referenced An American Dilemma, 1944. Even earlier, at the beginning of the century, W.E.B. Du Bois, a sociologist, I'm proud to say, and the first African-American to get a PhD from Harvard in any subject, he wrote The Souls of Black Folk, which I highly recommend as a book. If you like to go back, be really worth studying. It really holds up. It's a combination of literature, folklore, sociology. But he said very famously at the beginning of the 20th century that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. Well, I'm sad to say the problem of the 21st century in America continues to be the color line. And that's what Black Lives Matter is all about. And then finally, there's the idea that white people have, I think the most commonly associated thing, and Robin DiAngelo talks about this explicitly in White Fragility, that as long as I don't say anything bad, I'm not racist. You know, I'm not racist, I'm okay. And my friend and fellow diversity educator, Maura Cullen, talks about what she calls explainaways. And I think this is a very useful concept. Explainaways where we just dismiss, oh, come on, it's not that bad. Or he didn't really mean it. Or I didn't really mean it. You know, I said this thing, I used this language, I treated you this way, but hey, I didn't really mean it, so it's okay.
Yeah.
Well, I always say to students, it's like an auto accident. If I hit you, but I say I don't mean it, are you any less hurt? Of course not.
And am I any less responsible?
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
So we can't confuse intent with impact.
Right.
What we have to look at, okay, intent is important. I mean, we should try to be nice people, but it's the impact of our language, our behavior, and most of all, our actions and the actions of the system we live in on people that most matter.
Right.
And I think that is perhaps the hardest thing for white people to grasp. You, of course, say, I don't own slaves. My family didn't own slaves, perhaps. I'm not a bad person, therefore I'm okay. Or I've got a black friend and they can vouch for me. I'm cool, I'm woke, I'm down, it's all good.
But none of that really exposes the fact that we live in a system built by white people and in a system which largely benefits white people, and that continues that system.
Just
So I wanna
one
pivot
more
now.
point.
Yeah, go ahead, quickly.
Just one more thing on that, if you don't mind. Exactly, that racism is a system. Any ism is a system. If you talk about capitalism, socialism, communism, Nazism, fascism, all isms are systems. They're not just, they're based on ideas, of course,
Right.
but they're systems of institutional operations that have rules and practices that become sedimented over time. And so racism is not just an attitude of bigoted people. Yes, it can be manifest that way, but racism is a system And if you're white in this society, you are part of the problem. I am part of the problem.
Yep.
I benefit by my skin color
Yep.
every single day in ways that I try to fathom, but don't always fathom, and in constantly being educated about, as some of you referenced.
Thank you, Pat. So racism in general is often a difficult topic for us to understand and talk about, but the title of our panel today is White Male Perspectives on Black Lives Matter. So I think we want to get to that next. And rather than banter about ideas, what we think Black Lives Matter means or stands for, I went directly to the source. So I went to blacklivesmatter.com, and I want to read to you their mission and vision statements, their goal statements. Black Lives Matter was founded in 2013 in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer. Black Lives Matter Foundation, Inc. is a global organization in the US, UK, and Canada whose mission is to eradicate white supremacy and build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on Black communities by the state and vigilantes. By combating and counteracting acts of violence, creating space for Black imagination and innovation, and centering Black joy, we are winning immediate improvements in our lives. We are expansive. We are a collective of liberators who believe in an inclusive and spacious movement. We also believe that in order to win and bring as many people with us along the way, we must move beyond the narrow nationalism that is all too prevalent in Black communities. We must ensure we are building a movement that brings all of us to the front. We affirm the lives of Black queer and trans folks, disabled folks, undocumented folks, folks with records, women, and all Black lives along the gender spectrum. Our network centers those who have been marginalized within Black liberation movements. We are working for a world where Black lives are no longer systematically targeted for demise. We affirm our humanity, our contributions to this society, and our resilience in the face of deadly oppression. The call for Black lives to matter is a rallying cry for all Black lives striving for liberation. So with that as a backdrop, I would like just to get a quick reaction or response from you about that mission statement in its own. What do you think about it? Nick, you want to lead us off?
Sure. I mean, I completely agree with those goals, and I want to promote those because those goals, you know, are my values. I want to protect and uphold and defend against senseless killings. And, you know, I mean, I believe in being inclusive and giving a voice to those who historically have been not able to raise their voices and, you know, affirm the lives of, you know, all of the Black people, queer people, disabled people, undocumented people, you know, all of those folks. And, you know, again, I just think everything that they say in there is something that I believe in and is a value of my own. So it does kind of confound me sometimes that the Black Lives Matter movement can be a highly divisive thing when talking to other white people, because when you start to read what their goals are, it's like, well, how can you be against those things?
Yeah. So Tim, what's one thing from that mission statement that really stood out to you?
So I have to agree with what Nick says. I also feel like the fact that they include other different diversity, different demographics is important, because the issue for this and what we center around with the Black Lives Matter is Blackness, but intersectionality that Nick talked about before.
Yeah.
There are a lot of Black people who may be gay, or Black people who may be in a socioeconomic category, or disabled. And so I think the intersectionality piece of it makes it fit for everybody. And I feel like we're at a time and a point where there is something that we need to have, like a center. Like there was a Martin Luther King and people centered on. I think this is an opportunity, and I like their mission because it's something that we all can buy into.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it gives us a place to center and start working together to eradicate racism.
Thanks. Pat, what's one thing that stood out to you?
Well, what stands out to me most about the Black Lives Matter movement that I think is so important in addition to inclusion, which is part of the statement you read it, and it's Nick has and Tim have spoken to that, is that this movement is decentralized, non-hierarchical, grassroots. You know, there's no single individual spokesperson. That it's truly a movement of people who have input at all kinds of levels. And what's important about that to me is, as important as Martin Luther King was to that movement, there were a whole lot of people that were doing it before Martin Luther King joined the civil rights movement and did it after he was assassinated.
Right.
So not in any way to diminish his role, but too often we're sort of waiting for a savior. You know, if only Martin Luther King would come, Martin Luther King would rise up, you know, and make great speeches, or Frederick Douglass, or whatever. And the great thing about the Black Lives Matter movement is it says, no, 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 it's up to all of us. We're all part of this. We need it. Now, we don't want to forget, though, that it's Black Lives Matter, and it should be defined by Black people based on their lived experience.
Yeah.
We as white people can be allies and join in, and that's very encouraging. And I know we're going to talk about this later in terms of what's going on. But I think that's key to the Black Lives Matter movement is the way they're going about this.
Great. And Todd, what's one distinctive that really spoke to you? Oh, I think you're muted, Todd.
We affirm the lives piece really, you know, hooks on my belief system. You know, I guess we're going to talk about this later, but it becomes problematic when other people don't even read their mission statement and that kind of stuff. And so I think if we could get this information out more broadly, it might gain a bigger audience because of that. And I don't see anywhere in here that they're talking about the overthrow of anything. I think this is all about inclusion, and we're all human beings.
Yeah.
Even though we're going to hear from the Black people, the people of color that have their lived experiences, and that needs to be the driver, and we need to listen. I think it's very inclusive, and I think it is wonderfully written. I wish more people would pay attention to it.
Yeah. So some of the pushback we've heard, and I've heard this from some of my friends, and you probably have too. Well, don't all lives matter? Why do we just have to focus on Black lives? So how do you compare and contrast those two statements, and why do you think Black Lives Matter is a statement that deserves to stand alone?
Could I just...
Pat, sure.
The best metaphor I've ever heard for dealing with this is very simple and I think very accessible. Imagine that one day you find, to your great dismay, your house is on fire. You call the fire department and you say, my house is on fire, send the fire trucks. And they say, well, all houses matter. All houses matter. We need to send fire truck. The fire truck will go to each house and check to see if there's a problem. You say, no, my house is on fire.
Yeah,
Send
right
the
now.
fire trucks to my house.
Yeah.
I'm the one that needs them. They say, no, but all houses matter. And we want to make sure that we include everyone on your block. And you say, no, my house. So in American society today, it's Black lives that are on fire. It's their house that is burning. It's their house that is most at risk. Now, not to say that other people don't face problems and can't use help and so on, but send the fire trucks where the house is on fire. So yes, of course, all lives matter, but they don't all matter until Black lives matter.
Right. Thank you. Other thoughts?
You know, this one, I think for me in particular is a question, you know, the difference between the two that we as white people really need to step up and confront, because, you know, just that is a microaggression. I view it as a microaggression, and this is a conversation that I've had in my family. I mean, I have family members that I love, but they just cannot get past the all lives matter. You know, why is it just this individual group? And, you know, I keep saying Black Lives Matter isn't stating that Black lives are more important, just like what, you know, Pat was saying. It's saying that Black lives are being, openly, unapologetically, and violently destroyed. And we need to shed light on that hatred and that violence that's being leveled against them.
Right.
And for me, saying all lives matter is just, it's erasing that fact. It's covering that fact over when we, and just saying that everybody matters equally. And the whole, what you had just read regarding the goals of Black Lives Matter, they are inclusive in and of themselves. So that obviously doesn't make any sense when I hear those arguments of they're just trying to single themselves out and put themselves on well, if they were to do that, then they wouldn't be as inclusive and try to get a large coalition behind that. So for me, I think this is one area where we as white people can step in and say, no. We've got to have a deeper conversation. And people honestly have to do their homework just a little bit more, because we get all of this all the time from the pundits on TV and a very glossed over, superficial kind of understanding. And people just aren't doing their homework to understand that there is a vast difference between those two sayings.
Yeah, let me just read again some statistics. These come from the NAACP organization, and they use Statista as their source. Despite the fact that more white people have been killed by police, Black and Hispanic people are disproportionately impacted. While white people make up a little over 60% of the population, they only make up about 41% of fatal police shootings. Black people make up 13.4% of the population, but make up 22% of fatal police shootings. This does not take into consideration other forms of police brutality, including non-lethal shootings. So is this the crux of it, perhaps, that Black people are saying, we recognize other people are being killed by police, but we're being killed disproportionately? Is that the linchpin of that argument behind Black Lives Matter?
Absolutely. And not just that they're being killed disproportionately, people are getting away with it, and there's nothing that is being done to actively stop it. Just like with the grand jury verdict with Breonna Taylor, from my standpoint, as a white male, her neighbor's walls got more justice than she did. And so people are upset by that. And what they're saying with Black Lives Matter is we've got to put a spotlight here, because again, all lives can't matter until Black Lives matter. And then we can move on to, and then we can put focus on other equity seeking minorities that are being murdered in the streets. And nobody's doing anything about it. So yeah, I think this right here with the all lives matter is a thing that we as white people need to confront when we hear it.
And I would suppose that those statistical differences are similar in terms of incarceration rates as well. Black and brown people disproportionately incarcerated. So why are white males in general, why does the common response to Black Lives Matter seem to be defensiveness and threatened? In other words, if Black Lives Matter, then you're saying my life doesn't matter. Why in particular do white males seem to be threatened by this movement and discussions of racism? From your experience, how would you answer that?
So I'll take a stab at that. I think one of the issues for me, as I've listened to stuff over the years, has always been that as an individual person, I have worked very, very hard for everything that I have. And I feel like I've earned everything that I have. And I kind of grew up in an environment where that's how it was for everybody. And I think that over time, that has caused more issue. I mean, that perpetuates the racism issue, because I feel like I earned what I have. Nobody gave me anything. And so why can't that be the same for everybody? Mm-hmm. And it isn't. If you admit white privilege and you can look at yourself and see that now, and it doesn't negate that I worked hard for what I have, but there are things that somebody may have had to work 10 times harder than I did to get to the same place.
Not a fair playing field. Yeah. Go ahead, Pat.
Sorry.
I have a metaphor I share with my class that I stumbled on one day when I was at the airport. I was looking at those moving sidewalks, you know, that they have in airports, you know, that and you can choose to take it or you can choose to walk along. But suppose that those moving sidewalks were invisible. You didn't know they were there. And that white people were systematically shuttled on to the moving sidewalk where black people had to schlep their luggage just through the hallway. And then imagine that it's kind of like our society was like Southwest Airlines, where depending, you know, first come, first serve, you get the best seats if you get there first. So people work hard to get to the gate, to get the best seats. Everybody's schlepping their luggage. Everybody's working hard. You get there first. As a white person, you say, I deserve to be here. I mean, I know that I schlepped this luggage and I worked hard to get here. I'm sweating. And so then this black person says, but it was unfair. And you say, oh, come on. I worked hard. I know I worked hard. Except what you didn't notice is that you were on the moving sidewalk. Society created institutionally a moving sidewalk for you that got you there out of your awareness. And until you stop and look and say, wow, white people really are able to move a lot faster, you won't know that effort should be rewarded, absolutely. But it's not equal opportunity.
It's a powerful image.
I think for me, you know, one thing that really infuriates me is that some people feel like giving rights or finding ways to be equitable in society, that is somehow a finite resource, that one has to take rights from another group and disperse them to other people. And I think that, and when you mix something like that in with, I mean, America is a highly individualistic society. We're incredibly competitive. And so white males have always been number one because we've stacked the game that way. And when you sort of think about, well, by making things equitable, are you trying to put me at number two? I think that puts them in a very competitive nature, because they think that in order for others to have equality, to have equity, and to give rights, they have to get theirs taken away. And that is one thing that infuriates me the most.
Todd?
Well, you know, stepping back just a second and moving forward at the same time, the all lives matters usually, many times, often with white people, is just the first of many explainaways, as Pat Ashton said. And why white males are so particularly threatened is not only because it threatens their own self-sense of meritocracy, but actually when you get alone with a lot of, or many white males, there's also the deficit model. African Americans, people of color, are to bear personal responsibility for their failures. To think about that for a minute. It also goes the other way. Whereas if you're in Detroit and you're unemployed and you got COVID and then whatever, you know, you give all these attributes of something, well, that's because they chose it. You know, the deviancy model is very strong in the white male perspective, even if they won't admit to it. It's very, very strong in the white perspective. So it's not only that you're telling me that I'm not a good person and I didn't earn mine, but you're also challenging my notion of, well, they earned where they got too.
Yeah.
Could I just, picking up on what Nick said, I know this isn't, I'm sure this is an issue that you confront at Ivy Tech institutionally, just as every institution I've been associated with has, and that is this issue of equality versus equity. And, you know, Nick, you use both those terms, but I think it's really important in educating people to differentiate, because, and here's at a conference, I can't take responsibility for this, but at a conference, I heard that one of the speakers give this metaphor, and they said equality is where everybody has a pair of shoes. Everybody gets shoes, but equity is where everybody gets shoes that fit.
Yep.
So that means that somebody has big feet is going to get bigger shoe. And you can say, well, that's not fair. They got a big shoe. I only got a small shoe. They have so much more leather than I do. they need a big shoe and you don't. So people get what they need. And of course, I know the people on this panel, you're involved in services for students with special needs and so on. And of course, people with special needs need special things. That's what equity is. But when people get it confused with simple equality, you know, he got twice as many cookies as I got, or, you know, has whatever. That simple equality is not what we're talking about. We are talking about equity. And that makes the big difference, that the Black House is on fire and needs the fire department.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
At all? Do you mind if I interject a little something?
Go ahead, Mike.
All right. So a question for all of you guys. Do you believe, since the inception of the country, that anything was ever to be equal amongst all of us?
No.
No.
Because we are still considered 3/5 of a person, according to our U.S. Constitution. So
Right.
I'm still not considered a whole person.
Yeah.
Right.
So
No, we
even
had
from the beginning, how can we actually work towards equality when from the very start we were never considered or even brought to the table?
I had a African-American student share her imagery with me along those lines. And she said, you know, slavery metaphorically cut off our legs as a race. Civil rights movement and some of the legislation that was passed gave us prosthetic legs, but we'll never win the race. And to me, that was a powerful way to describe, I think, what you're talking about, Mike. So
in my opinion, that I think we need to go back to the drawing board. We need to go back all the way to the beginning and start over again. Yeah. To where it's got to be written that, yes, all men are created equal. Because when it was written by slaveholders, not with and it wasn't with Africans in mind either. Yeah,
whose definition of men looked like
because
them,
we were considered property at that time. So how could a piece of property be considered equal? Right. So it was all white men, but they left that out of it, and of course, no women. But
right. And
well,
Mike,
sorry. Go
I was just going to amplify on what Mike said. I really enjoyed Dr. Kendi's book, Stamped from the Beginning, because it writes history. For 400 years, it was all set up that way, and actually, that foundation is still with us today.
Mm-hmm. And I think the Oklahoma burnings have opened our eyes to a vicious cycle that we've seen as Black folks advance and as they gain wealth and as they gain prominence in society. Often there is a counter movement that puts them back, and I think the wholesale burning of that Black town in Oklahoma brought to our attention those repetitive cycles. And it makes me wonder if what we're experiencing now is somewhat of a reaction against 8 years under a Black presidency. That counter whip is hitting us.
Well, and I would just like to echo Mike. Obviously, brings up a great point. We can't move forward without acknowledging, what took place in the past, and you've got to wrestle with that. And when I teach IVYT, a lot of my students, when we cover white privilege, which they say a lot of what Tim had talked about, they said, well, we live in a racist society. We elected a Black president. And for me, that really, now that I reflect on all of those years, it was that sometimes I think white people, because we elected a Black president, we stopped having the conversation. And because we stopped having the conversation about race, it began to fester. And suddenly it was okay to be, openly racist again. And you had people, like our current president, who were able to say the things that he was able to get away with and still get elected. So yeah, I just want to reiterate, we talk so much about what we want to do in the future, but that we need to own up, and we need to acknowledge, and we need to deal with that generational trauma. generational trauma, centuries worth of trauma that has happened, because that'll never go away.
Yeah.
Picking up on what Nick said, Dr. Joy DeGroy, a psychologist, talks about post-traumatic slave syndrome. And if you take all the symptoms of PTSD writ large, she says that's the legacy of 250 years of slavery, 100 years of Jim Crow, and then the new Jim Crow, as Michelle Alexander and others have pointed out, and Ava DuVernay's 13th, which is a fantastic documentary if you haven't seen it, really point out. So that as Mike says, from the beginning, the system has been rigged and continues to be rigged. And so if we want to talk about equity, we need to look at things like changing the ability for intergenerational wealth.
Right.
I mean, the average white family owns over $100,000 of wealth, mostly in houses. The average black family owns less than $4,000.
Yeah.
How do you start a business? How do you go to college? How does the bank lend you money at all for anything? So what we have is a system that has put a group so far behind that drastic measures, yes, the house is on fire and it needs not only a fire department, but reconstruction.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't necessarily say go back as Mike's suggesting, but I take the heart of what you're saying to be that fundamental reconstruction has to go on here.
Let's tackle one more question, and then I really want to open it up for Q&A, either chat or, I'm fine with people just weighing in verbally too. If you're comfortable with that, just unmute yourself and ask away. It might get a little hairy, but we'll figure it out. One more question here. We'll go back to author Robin DiAngelo. She asserts that the work of white people when it comes to reversing historical racial oppression is, quote, engaging in ongoing self-awareness, continuing education, relationship building, and actual anti-racist practice. Quick weigh in here. Do you agree that that is our work as white people? Ongoing self-awareness, continuing education, relationship building, and actual anti-racist practice. Anything you'd add to that list?
I mean, when I started looking at that and looking at what have I done, right? What have I done outside of signing a petition, showing up at a rally, or liking a Facebook post? What am I actually doing to advance things? And so for me, this has really gotten me to take a look at, I espouse these things, I believe these things, these are my values, but how am I making having any effect on these things? And so I think, if anything, this has allowed me to really realize, I don't have to be the centerpiece of the conversation. There are other people that need to be doing that, but when they say I need to do something, I better jump in there and I better do what they're asking me to do, whether that's to vote, whether that's to show support in whatever way they need me to. It has to go from passive to active, and I think that's where a lot of white folks can get caught in this inertia of not. Yes, I can put a post on Facebook, but that's really not doing much of anything, because you're just sort of shouting at all the people that believe the same things you do, especially if you're on social media. So I think moving from that passivity toward activity is really what we need to do, and we need to remember that we need to follow. There are others that need to be leading.
So I'd like to toss that to the group. Because Nick, I think you've hit a nerve that all of us feel, that twinge of pain. It's like, how do I become a silent advocate and become an active ally? Yeah. So what would you say, folks, that you recognize are behaviors, our decisions, our actions that you can be making now to extend your privilege, to leverage your privilege on behalf of others, and to help level the playing field a bit? Thoughts?
So part of this for me is like very new, and I feel like I'm learning, and I've been asking myself the question, like, how do I help since the main protest that happened in downtown Fort Wayne, and you go by and you saw them, and I'm like, I'm not really sure how I can help. I can go down and walk, I can carry a sign, but I don't know how that takes the privilege that I have and makes things better for somebody. And so part of the reason I want to be in this conversation and open it, and I think it's important for us to open it up as white people, is because I need somebody to maybe show me some of that or help me to learn some of those things. And it may be as simple as me having breakfast with some of my friends that I went to high school with, and they start talking about all lives matter instead of just sitting there thinking, God, these guys don't get it. I need to say, you guys don't get it. It's not about you, and it's not about what we've done for the last 30 years. It's about these people who have had stuff done to them for the last 30 years. And so it may be that simple, that I just need to be vocal when other people aren't following and or getting the idea.
I think, Tim, that's just a terrific point. When you see something, say something. Of course, that has to be preceded by education. We have to educate ourselves as to what some of the dynamics are. But just noticing things and being willing to speak up from a position of having a voice, of just seeing things. I mean, when I'm in restaurants, when I think, I'll say, I'd like to speak to a manager because I think that we came in way after that African-American group over there, and I'm just wondering why we're getting served first and why we have better seats. And maybe it's not, but I'd like you to explain that to me. Now, if a black person goes and says that, they say, oh, quit playing the race card. You want all kinds of special things. But when I go and say it, they say, why do you care? I say, because I don't want to eat in a racist restaurant. So I'm curious as to your explanation for this. So, I mean, I don't, everybody's not going to do what I'm doing. I've worked all these years at making myself into a professional big mouth. In whatever your circle is, as you say, Tim, when you're with friends or family, or if you feel more empowered, take it out further. And when you see something, say something. That it matters that lots of white people say, I don't like what the police are doing to black people. And they say, why do you care? You don't get treated that way. You don't get pulled over. Because I don't want to live in a society that does that.
So it's starting to see your privilege, but then refusing the privilege.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I want to open it up to the group. Other thoughts that you might have about ways to be allies, about ways to use our voice, or something we've talked about in the last 45 minutes that really kind of piqued your attention. I'd love to hear from some of you. I'm not seeing any questions on my chat feed. How about, okay, here's one. In what ways do you think social media has influenced racism? That's a really interesting question, because that was one of our 8 that I chose to skip over because of time. But I think we all are living in an era of fake news, and yet we are shaped by who we listen to. So I'd toss it back to the group. How do you think we can be better consumers of media so that we're not just hearing one vantage point?
So this one hits hard for me because, I love my grandparents. They basically raised me, but I didn't find out my grandparents were racist until they got Facebook accounts, and started, pushing racist, xenophobic, Islamophobic messaging that clearly they didn't create. Right? They found it on somebody else somebody else's post. They forward it, and so it's gotten to the point where I'm not even friends with my grandma on Facebook because I chose to reject that. I've got a grandparent, my grandfather. because of what has been happening in our society right now, I had to tell him, we will no longer allow those one-off jokes that you think are funny, that, you know, before, I'm not gonna lie, we were complicit, we were silent in letting him make those jokes and then move on. And we had to say, if you do that again, you're not welcome here anymore. So everybody just feels like they're getting their own opinions reinforced through social media. And as far as the news goes, I mean, there aren't many organizations you can turn to that are going to give you the actual facts. You know, somebody actually told me the other day that the news used to tell you what happened and then you were allowed to figure out what you thought about it. And now the news is telling you how you think about things, and we have to figure out whether they actually happened or not.
Yeah.
And so for me, you know, as somebody who feels like they are liberal, right, but also wanting to make up my own opinions, I'm a huge NPR nut. So I can't go to Fox or MSNBC or really even CNN. That's the outlet that I feel is the most unbiased and gives me the facts so that I can make my own opinions on things. But, you know, social media, I've had to pretty much take a break and say, guys, I can't do this anymore. I can't be complicit in what I'm seeing.
So a comment came in saying it's important to check sources when something is written on social media that we might question. Really good reminder. Yep.
If I could add in on it, just something that's changed, and instead of talking social media or media, let's say broadcasting for a minute. Broadcasting used to be seen as a civic responsibility. The FCC closely regulated it. There was equal time rules. Regulation, the FCC has been totally gutted on that account. And so, you know, you don't not only have a plethora of more resources coming at you, but there's less regulation, and it's not seen as a civic responsibility anymore. It's now entertainment. And so you have a 24-hour news cycle that you have to make sure that you're keeping those eyeballs and ears on your screen. And so what you're going to do is play to confirmation bias and things like that. So that was kind of my 2 cents worth there, is we went from broadcasting as a civic duty to an entertainment business industry. And there you're going to use whatever you can to keep those eyeballs on the commercials.
So a comment came in, and it's an interesting comment. It says, I think we should be more open to the idea that there are no separate races when we all are human. Do you think that we're living in a time where there's a hyper emphasis on race, and is it thereby making the frictions worse?
Well,
yes, I do.
To answer your
question,
it's absolutely true. There's only one.
Because especially now, especially with 45 in office right now, it has hyping. It actually started before when Barack Obama was in office. That these people started. They started out as quote unquote Tea Party, which that to me in itself was is just pretty stupid, because the Tea Party itself started out as revolutionaries, you know, just we're going to go.
But we called it a Tea Party, not a revolution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it started then, and I there was an underlying like everybody's like, especially with Fox News and these propaganda people like Alex Jones and Rush Limbaugh, kind of making their little digs here and there, emboldening these people more and more. Till 45 got in there, you know, and when that happened, they're like, okay, well, we got one of ours in office, so now we can kind of take our coats off, kind of stick our chests out, and express how we really feel.
Come out of hiding.
And finally, exactly, come out of hiding and actually show how we really feel. But it's all been against the progress that was being made. So when Barack Obama, for us as Africans, for when Barack Obama became president, there seemed like that there would be hope for equality, for hope for atonement, for 150 years of brutality, slavery, just terror that has been visited upon a single culture of people. And there still has not been that atonement. So think of that. Think of how we are born into this. So I had a conversation with my cousin, and I posed this question to her, and she, you know, there's always this question where, well, are you born racist? Are you born, or is being racist taught, right? And my answer to her was, well, we are born into a racist society because of the way the system the founding fathers had laid it out for us. They laid it out without Africans being included. So you are born into this society. It doesn't matter if your parents were racist, doesn't matter if your grandparents were racist. The society itself that we are born into is racist. And we've got to change society. We got to change the mindset of not just, we can't change our mindset being at the ages that we are, because we've already been born into it. The children that are coming up, we've got to change their mindset so they can change our society for us, because we can't do it. We can't do it. We've pushed back, and as you see right now, there's civil unrest because of it. Because there's those people that want to just, no, I like my Confederate flag. I like my racism. I like my whiteness. I'm going to fight you back.
Yeah.
You start with the children and teach them that we are all the same.
Thanks,
because
Mike.
if you see little kids, the biggest thing, like everybody saw the video with the two little boys, one black, one white, running down the street and just embraced each other. And that is the mindset of children right there.
Yeah.
That they actually don't see color, right? They actually don't see color.
Yeah.
They just see somebody that they love, and they just want to hang out with that person.
But I'd like to believe some of us old dogs could learn some new tricks, and that's their hope for us as well.
But we've got to pass that to the next generation so they can actually change the society, because we won't be able to.
Yeah.
Without
comments came in, a couple suggestions. One was just get off social media. Start having these complex conversations face to face. Don't rely on Facebook to say it for you. And then another, as far as actions that can support, donate to the movement. I mean, money speaks, and money is a form of power, and use your money to help those who are fighting. Mike's points are excellent. What I'm hearing is that racism, it's comfortable. We know it. We like it. It's how the system is, and change has to be systemic. So I want to wrap up. We've only got about 5 minutes left. This has been awesome, and I'm excited about some of the things we were able to cover today. We haven't answered everything. We probably raised a few issues that scare us a little bit, but I think that's okay. It helps us know we're alive and that we care, right? So here's what I want to hear from the panelists as we close up. We're living in a time where social movements, a health pandemic, a presidential election, and an economic downturn are intersecting and exposing many of the results of systemic racism, historical systemic racism. So in a sentence, guys, and I'm going to hold you to it, in a sentence, what is your hope for the future of American race relations? Big task. Let me hear it. Pat, start us off.
Never before have we had such a grassroots, multiracial movement led by the main victims, African Americans. And it gives me great hope because of the nature of the movement and the way that it has captured the attention and now gained support. But unless it goes to those structural issues, the rules of the game, if we don't change the rules of the game, we'll be playing this game continuously. So, but I'm hopeful in the approach we're taking today, in the number of white people who are willing to take on the burden of their privilege.
Thanks, Pat. Somebody else? Todd, Nick, Tim?
I would just hope we could get to a point where we could see that when my brothers and sisters are doing well and they're healthy and happy and thriving and have a meaningful existence, that's good for me. That we can get away from this blind individualism and get more to a point of, I'm better off when you're better off.
Away deficit mindset. Yeah. Nick?
So my hope was, it's a simple one, that it just gets better. If it gets better because I met Mike today and I learned something from him that makes me a better person, and I can share that with my child or a friend, and it makes somebody else better. My hope is that it grows and expands.
Relationship by relationship. Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Nick?
I mean, I could talk about economic reform, police reform, reparations, all of that, but I mean, there's a laundry list there, but I think the main thing is continuous work. We can't stop, and there's always going to be something out there to do. And as soon as we stop talking about it, we allow those who would subvert us to begin consolidating and finding a way to creep back in and make us backslide. We need to go forward while acknowledging the past.
Great. All right, and I'm going to ask our guest panelist, Mike, to weigh in. Mike, one sentence. What's your hope for the future of American race relations?
That we all learn to have compassion for one another. That we all can come together and actually live those words that are given to us through Christ in the Bible, and actually live them to actually just love one another, because that's what it ultimately shows us. You know what I mean? Because we're all the same. We all are human. We all are created in, if you believe, God's image. It doesn't matter what color you are. We all are still created in His image. There is no one master race. We are all the human race.
Yep.
And we all just need to learn that. And once we finally do, I believe this world can be a better place, and we can thrive and not, and I guess it could say in harmony, but but it would just be better off if we would just have compassion for one another and actually see people as people.
Well said. And I think that's the best final word we could have asked for. So thank you, panelists, and thank you, Mike. I appreciate your courage today and for sharing your perspective. And
thank you for having me. Yeah. Actually, I saw this on One Warsaw site, and I was just telling JoAnne that I just wanted to weigh in and actually listen to your guys' point of view.
Yeah.
Pat Ashton, you are awesome. I just got to say,
Thank you.
And Nick also, you guys, I loved your guys' insight. You guys have a lot of books, and actually, I would love to get some of those books, the name of some of those books off. I would love to read them, because I didn't even know anything about them. So
I'm happy to forward a list of some resources to JoAnne, and you can make that available.
You know, Pat, if you want, you could actually put those in the chat, because I think we're going to get the transcript of the chat as well. So that would be a good place to start. If you want to, if you have 2 or 3 titles that just come right off the top of your mind. Well, we got to wrap it up, and we want to say thanks to all of you who participated today.
Thank you.
We had a really good turnout, about 45 of us, and I'm pleased with that. So that's great, and that tells me that there's a lot of interest and energy around conversations like this. So our hats off to JoAnne and the Diversity Council for spearheading this event and for wading into something that might have felt a little dangerous. And I want to thank everyone who helped put it together. So on behalf of the panel, thank you, and let's go out and continue to do great work and to be advocates and allies for all people. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. You did awesome. We truly appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I did put my email in the chat if anybody wants to send me some topics for discussion that we can look at, or have any questions or comments, or would like me to connect you to one of the panelists. So again, panelists, we appreciate you. Thank you. And I will stick around, panelists, if you'll stick around until everybody leaves, if that's okay, in case anybody has something to ask.
Sure.
We'll just kind of wait here. I know people are logging off.
JoAnne, this is Tracy. This was amazing. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for coming.
I think we got to continue the conversation, and we do the similar format from a Black male perspective, and from a Black female perspective and a white female perspective, just because each of us has different insight, different experiences, and you know, so much to share. So I think, oh, this was amazing. Thank you guys so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you,
Tracy.
Tracy. Thank
You're welcome.
you.
I